Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and Happy New Year once again. I know it's like way too late into January for me to start the actual 2022 content, or art, as I like to refer to it as. But today begins genre January, I guess. I know, you don't gotta tell me. I know. Just drop it. Let's talk about the music, because this year for genre January, it's very special because we are covering Swedish cloud rap. Not just cloud rap, but Swedish cloud rap. And I know that's just one country. Does that really make it a genre? Well, in black metal, you can kind of pin a sound to a subgenre by the country. So I think it's more than viable, especially because there is a culture surrounding the four individuals that I'll mainly be talking about in the future in terms of vocals. But there are also three producers who show up a whole lot. And to start off genre January, we're going to be covering the entire discography of one Young Lean. If you guys remember last year, if you were there, we covered Crunkcore. Crunkcore is bad. And you're probably among the impression that I would be railing on Young Lean and Blade and Drain Gang. But here's the thing. I picked them because I wanted to have more fun. Last year, and this is not me like complaining about like my situation. I have a lot of things in life I can complain about. This is not one of them. Literally everything I do in here, I choose to do, and I love doing it. Even requests, I could say no easily. That series last year, genre January, covering Crunkcore, nearly ruined this channel. Because listening to that much terrible music in a row, honestly, was really disheartening. Because I don't even like listening to average music that much in a row. So it's just kind of hard for me to do. It's not fun. But don't expect me to rag on Young Lean and the fellas today. Don't expect me to rag on Drain Gang that much. And I mean, I will rag on them a little bit. This will be an honest critique of all their work, pretty much, minus maybe a couple odd singles that aren't really mentioned very often. Here's the thing. I've been enjoying Young Lean, and I'm excited to talk about his discography. I'm going to say straight up, just to sort of reach a little mid-ground here, don't expect super high scores for his albums, because the thing about Young Lean is that he has a lot of really amazing songs. Typically, in an album format, he doesn't quite get there for like a great album, but it's usually consistent enough where you could have like no less than like 4 songs on a release. Like even on his really short releases, probably like 4 of the songs are like great, and you can listen to them at any point and really, really enjoy them. And also in Young's discography, I found probably like 3 or 4 of my new favorite songs on there to throw in my pile of other dozens and dozens and dozens of favorite songs. Of course, I am an album person, so it's a little weird for me to like say that like I'm really enjoying a guy when I'm not really loving any of his albums. There's really only like one album in this whole thing that I would consider purchasing if it is of a format I am pleased with. But another caveat I want to give, I firmly believe that this kind of music would be far superior, very, very loud for the most part. Some of it is just introspective enough and not that swampy sounding, so that you could actually get a good hold on it without like the blasted out sound with crazy 808s, because a lot of this stuff has some huge 808 rumble. I'm reviewing this with Audio Technicas, as I do everything, for pretty much unbiased general way to look at it. And if you want to say that's part of the criticism, totally sure. Like I firmly believe, like, gosh, first album to come on mind of a great album, Kid A by Radiohead. I don't like to mention Radiohead that much because I know it's like kind of a meme, but I love that album, and I think it's just as effective at a decent volume as it is a really loud volume. And can't say that about everything. I'd say Young Lean is much better at a very loud volume. I'd say a ton of black metal stuff is much better at a very loud volume, but I mean, I'm digressing. But here's the thing with Young Lean's discography. First, he technically released Lavender, the EP, but he didn't release it as one whole release. It was 3 individual singles that he bunched together, and I'll get to them in a sec. So I'm going to review them after Unknown Death 2002, but I want to let you guys know that the style was already established. These songs were beforehand. And we're gonna get into Unknown Death 2002, which I'm pretty excited for because it's actually a rather unique album. Its approach is kind of revolutionary, and the thing about Youngling's discography in terms of style, it feels fresh. As much as like going through his discography has been kind of eye-opening as you realize he evolves so much, it never feels dated. Like, which is funny because he has several collaborations back in the day that feel instantly dated because of who he's collaborating with. But he's still alive and well and doing his thing, and yet he never sounded dated once, even back then. Even though it's like very meme-worthy stuff, which is kind of hilarious because that was like the genesis of meme stuff. 2013. Like, we didn't have good memes yet. It's probably like, what was that, like Shrek is swag? Maybe. I'm referring to like post-rage comics, like irony stuff. This is important cultural information for Youngling. Anywho, Unknown Death 2002. So this is his debut mixtape, of which he has 3 mixtapes in total. They're all kind of slept on except for Unknown Death, because Unknown Death is kind of the most influential one, and there's certainly a batch of tracks on here that I enjoy. So let's get into it. First, we got Welcome to Unknown Death. So this really establishes his sound is more spacey, and it really firmly cements Youngling's earliest stuff, the Lavender EP, the Kyoto single, and Unknown Death, as humorous, not to be taken all that seriously. And that does honestly pull away a little bit from the effectiveness of this album, but as a concept, it pulls through as a whole. I'm just going to say it right now. But there are a couple songs on here that are meant to be more serious that just don't hit the way they're supposed to, because that vibe doesn't catch you as well as the humor already has. It's a little tough to switch like that. It's not a smooth transition. And this intro track has a lot of whirling samples that give us a lot of interesting personality, a lot of feelings like Ginseng Strip, which I'm going to talk about a lot once we reach the Lavender EP. It's a decent little opener, but then we get into Night Vision featuring Blade. I'm going to talk about Blade a lot this review, and when I cover Blade's discography next week, I'll cover him, of course, a lot more. But a weird thing about Blade and Young Lean, in my opinion, he makes every song he's on with Lean phenomenal, which is funny because Glue hadn't even come out yet. Blade only had singles up at this point. He was not that firmly established. He didn't have a lot of experience, and yet he comes onto the Lean project and he comes to work. He really does, which is funny because his delivery is also rather laid back, lackadaisical, not that engaging to some, or even embarrassing to others, but I typically enjoy Blade's contributions. I will say Night Vision ain't it for a song. For me, it's not my favorite. Of all the Blade features on the Lean albums, this is the weakest. It's his weakest autotune, which, judging by Glue, he didn't really know how to use autotune that well yet, because this is early Blade. Of course, Blade sounds good half the time, which you guys will hear a lot next week. Don't worry, just referring to Glue. And Youngling's flow here actually doesn't work that well with the production, which is a little more loose, less dense than before, kind of leaves a lot to be desired. It honestly gives him too much space for his bars to fill, and at this point his bars weren't that good yet, at least for the whole album stuff. Fortunately, I think this is one of the weakest tracks on the album, so you do get some better tracks after this. One of those is Oceans 2001, in which the instrumental has this really interesting, like, crunchy bass sound that keeps it up, and you guys are going to notice the 3 producers for Drain Gang and Young Lean as well are Young Sherman, Young Good, and White Armor. White Armor is mostly Drain Gang affiliate, but the Sad Boys here are Young Good, Young Sherman, and Lean. You're going to hear him mention Sad Boys a lot, and it's these 3, and the production every time is phenomenal, with the minor exception of like 2 beats, and sometimes Lean's auto-tune is not perfect. Sometimes it very much is, and we will get into that. But yes, the bass here is crushing, and artistically, it's a phenomenal idea. And for all of his releases up until this point, this is probably Lean's quickest flow. It's the most to the point. Really feels like he's got something to prove here. Honestly, the bars are kind of garbage. Lean's like 17 at this point, but they're kind of enjoyable. At least the flow is engaging, and I can't really complain. Next is the song Gatorade. This is a kind of legendary song for Lean, especially because of the hook. And I'll admit, it's kind of a banger. And you got a really common sort of instrumental theme for especially the Young Good and Young Sherman's earlier works with Young Lean. You got like these really spacey, bright synth sounds that have just this huge impact, which gives it honestly like a really psychedelic feel. It pretty much pervades the entirety of Lean's discography, is the psychedelic feel. It's cloud rap, it's druggy, it's super spaced out. And his bars on Gatorade are probably his best so far in terms of all his releases. And this is certainly one of the best cuts on the record. And of the hook, of course, it's meme stuff. It's absolute meme stuff, but it's really fun. It's fun. I can't complain about it at all. And since this single is on YouTube, I actually recommend, for the best Lean experience, listen on YouTube. Not like an actual app to listen to music on. If you listen to music typically on YouTube, let me just tell you straight up, don't do that. It doesn't support the artist that much. Spotify doesn't either, but Bandcamp would be perfect. But Spotify's got higher audio quality than YouTube for sure. But the thing about Young Lean, a lot of his stuff sounds a little better, kind of compressed, because it gives it an even hazier feeling. It feels more retro. A lot of this stuff, especially with Blade 2, has a very nostalgic feel to it. It just works. Anyways, after Gatorade, we get another Lean sort of classic, Hurt. Hurt is a kind of a fan favorite, but the thing is, it's not really one of my favorites because this song actually tries to be more serious. But to me, it comes across as like ultra violent. Like a lot of the song's themes have been before, where it's just like, I'll smack you, I'll do this, I'll do that. But here it's like, I'm gonna hurt you, which it's referring to like emotionally, like how he's not like a good guy. Think about Lean, he's not ready to sing about that yet. Later on he is, and he does, and it's great. Here it's just, I don't know. Also, the percussion on this track is one of the weakest Young Good Sherman points up until this point, and I think for the entire rest of the discography, it's just kind of a weird sound. I'll admit the bar about Caravaggio and all the Nintendo references are pretty fun. The bars are actually good enough to carry this through, but the concept of the song, not my favorite. Next is the song Lightsaber Savior, and even though the bars on this track are super weak, especially for Lean as a whole standards, his flow is aggressive enough where it doesn't pull you out that much. And with the combination of the synths and the vocals, it's got a very uplifting feeling as a whole. But I'll admit, the chorus is garbage on this track. It's just bad. And up next is Princess Daisy, one of the most different tracks on the album. Kind of has the Ginseng Strip sample type of beat going on here, which I'll mention Ginseng Strip later. But this one's really interesting because it's got sort of like this jazzy sample. And I don't have that much else to say about it. It's just kind of a decent track. I love the Nintendo reference, which he'll do plenty of other times. It kind of gives it more of a nostalgic feel here. It's absolutely a decent track, an interesting way to stylistically shift before the rest of the second half of the album. But up next is the track Lemonade featuring Baba Stilts. This is probably one of my two favorite tracks on the album. First of all, the instrumental on this track is insane. You've got this sort of like wind sounding instrumental with these auto-tuned backup vocals, as well as one of Lean's tightest flows to date over the top of it. Shows a lot of hunger despite the themes being kind of silly and the lyrics being kind of silly. And I love this self-awareness where he has bars about him speaking nonsense. He's pretty self-aware about it up until this point, how he just talks about random things, and I respect it a lot. It's probably one of the first introspective moments about Lean that really hits, and it's the smoothest transition to a serious topic Lean has had so far. Then we get the track Emails, and this is a track that's kind of weird to me. I don't have that much to say about it, but it's just at the point in the album that it can't really fall into a niche. It's just kind of reusing old ideas. Not necessarily bad, but not doing it for me. Next, we got the song Death Star / Getting Benjamins, and if you can't tell, if that's already like a super dope title, like what could go wrong? And the answer is nothing, because it's a phenomenal track. A spaced out hook dominates the whole track here, and it's probably Lean's first use of abstract lyricism, which Blade uses all the time, and it's one of his greatest strengths, especially the symbolism. But Lean starts using it here, and it's already effective. Also, the beat here is insane, and the lyrics, the way they're abstract is they're not like making any sense, but they totally fit this like a-hole who's ruining his own life vibe, which makes this whole mixtape here feel rather daunting in a way, like it's on a downward spiral, which is not a complete feeling yet, but I promise it will be. Next is the track Heal You / Blade Runner featuring none other than Blade. And the beat here is like rather sparse, which makes this feel rather novelty. Not an idea I'd want to hear over a whole album, but it's effective here. Blade totally steals the show here. His lyrics are kind of weak, but his flow and the way he's auto-tuned feels rather floaty and uplifting. One of his better features, at least so far. Of course, Blade's features get better and better, so not much to say with that. And to close out the album, we have Solar Flare. So you get some very hooky, trap-like flow here, which is really interesting because I don't think trap was like popular yet from what I remember being a kid then. And the production here, for probably like the first time, it's really elevating Young Lean's voice to a whole other level. And with the concept of the solar flare and the imagery portrayed in the lyrics here is really hazy, but it's really beautiful at the same time. And it's another really interesting instance where Young Lean shows a ton of potential, and it's stuff that he will expand upon later in the future. But that is the album. And as an art piece showing self-destruction, kind of interesting, even though you're kind of pulled out from it once or twice, and it's clearly not the intention. Of course, the execution is very amateurish. There are a few tracks here where his flow kind of like chops out at weird moments, but I'd be an idiot to not say that this shows a lot of potential. For me, this gets a Reddit so far. For a start, not terrible. 5 isn't that bad, honestly, because there are like 3 songs in here that like I love. But you're going to see that it gets a lot better. Sorry for the little jump cut in this recording. It is now tomorrow. But anyway, now we get into the Lavender EP, which is made of 3 singles, that being Oreo Milkshake, the infamous Ginseng Strip 2002, and the not as legendary Grey Goose. It's actually a track that I don't hear that much. I don't know how much Lean breaks it out live, but it's a short EP, just 3 tracks. And let's get into it. Now, this was my first time to sit down and get into Lean's music. I had friends sort of get me onto, one friend really get me onto some tracks from Stars, which is kind of what gave me the idea to do this review in the first place. But Oreo Milkshake was my first introduction to his early sound. It's crunchy, it's a little lo-fi sounding, but it's super cool. You got Young Good and Young Sherman on the beat for something really special here. And one thing that's going to stick out to you guys a lot probably is the sense of humor is so clear here. It's not as much on Unknown Death as it is on Lavender. Of course, it is the main appeal of Unknown Death. So in my opinion, Lavender is really you just take Unknown Death and cut out all the crap. That's a little negative of me, but the filler rather, and you just crunch it way down. There's probably 2 or 3 bad songs on Unknown Death, but you just crunch it down to 3 tracks and you get a full release here. Oreo Milkshake has this really mesmerizing instrumental with these really bright chime sounds, which is super different for the time. The lyrics are 100% ironic, but they're hype at the same time, like ultra violence, ultra sexual, and every drug under the sun mentioned here. You got codeine and cocaine, a whole lot of Sprite involved. You put your Xanax in your Sprite, and you're drinking it, and it's all this crazy stuff is going on. It is so singular in its purpose and its view. It's to be mindless hip hop fun, and it nails it right on the head. And that is one flaw you're going to see from Lean's first 2 releases compared to his later ones. They're not that serious, and the emotions never click. I know I mentioned this for Unknown Death, but I think it's important to restate here on his 3 original singles here. His voice with the auto-tune and the unique production create a rather unique atmosphere that I think doesn't even happen that much still today. And the themes, of course, are rather generic for hip-hop, especially with trap. But it's such an insane degree, I can't help but admire it. Then you get the legendary Ginseng Strip 2002. You start off with this wordling sample of a vocal bit before the trap sounding electronic 808 snare kicks in. Lean's flow is pretty tight, but he has this sort of surreal bits of lyricism that keep coming in and out. All these random references that give it this really bizarre, floaty, dreamlike feeling that is established here. And it's probably why some people refer to Ginseng Strip as one of the most iconic cloud rap songs of all time, because it's just condensed all into this one track. It's sort of like the title of the genre. It's just Ginseng Strip. The hook it sounds bad. It doesn't sound very good, but at the same time, it kind of grows on you. I can't really explain why I like it now, but I do. I think if the vocals were given a bit more of an effect, it would be amazing. But right here, it's super solid. And every time Lean breaks it out live, I mean, everyone goes crazy for it. And then we get to the very underrated cut, Grey Goose, probably the least known of these 3 tracks, which is so bizarre to me because this is like Viper levels of like cloud rap territory. It's so dense and thick that like you can't even like tell what's necessarily happening. It's so thick. It's like you're actually floating here. The vocals, they're mixed under the beat, and it sounds like a spiritualized song but like hip hop. And it's honestly my favorite track here. It's if any of these 3 feel serious, it's Grey Goose. I hope that he starts bringing it back live more. So what are my final thoughts on this EP? In some ways, Lean's best release, but I mean, it's never as satisfying as his later releases. After this point on, every track of his that's great is because it's emotional and it connects to you very deeply, which you guys will definitely notice when I talk about stuff like Warlord and Stars. But right now, I'm feeling like this is probably an iFunny. I'd say just all these tracks are like solid, but like Oreo Milkshake maybe goes a bit over the top. Not really any emotion here, but it's totally an enjoyable listen. And personally, maybe this thing would be even a little better if it had Kyoto on it for sort of a full 4-track listening experience. But it's a little sampling of his sound at the time. It feels amateurish. It feels kind of sloppy, but at the same time, it's just like, I don't care. And there's so much confidence behind it, you can't help but like love it. All right, and now we get into Unknown Memory, which is a rather unique listening experience because, as I've probably hinted at before, this is where Lean switches more into the emotional side of his work and the more conceptual side, the more lyrical side, as his lyrics get improved marginally, I'd say. Unfortunately, this is when he starts getting depressed for the artist, for the man, Mr. Lean Doer himself. But it makes the art a whole lot more impactful. I'm just glad that Lean's stuff is now introspective and reflective rather than right in the middle of it necessarily, even though I'm sure Lean's probably battling some demons still. But here you start feeling it, and it only goes downhill from here in terms of emotions. Quality goes up. But if I didn't mention this before, this is his debut full-length LP rather than a mixtape, because Unknown Death was a mixtape. And it's kind of interesting how it's like, oh, Lean, this is for money now. And he's like, okay, I'll be serious. And then he was serious, which is kind of funny. You can make money off of being funny. Like, I don't know if he switched for that reason, but I think it's funny. But you start off with the Blomor intro. It's some Swedish word. And it's like this rhythmic sort of static noise piece with some sort of drony synths underneath here. And it really shows the talent of Lean's producers here, that they're just really incredible. And it shows up again sort of on the Dog Walk intermission. I'll just say it now. But the noisy bits on Lean records, which really just happens here, they're pretty engaging. Textures are nice. I'm a noise fan. Well, I enjoy the genre of noise. I'm not going to claim to know that much about noise music, but I think it's a solid little piece here. And then comes the song Blinded, which builds off of the intro and it sort of soars off in its own direction, which has some really nice production behind it too. And I think the intro of this song is not that good. Kind of shows that Lean is still struggling to get all the way with his lyrics, but I think the whole rest of the song is actually rather fun, which is glad to know that he's sort of combining these two tones now before splitting off in the complete sad boy zone. And up next is Sunrise Angel. Basically, this song's beat would really make Lean out to be like the 4th vocalist of Drain Gang. I think he fits totally well, and he's been featured on several tracks of all of their members, so I think it's something totally worth mentioning. And at about 2 minutes into the song, it's got this sort of like climax of synths that's super dope, and Lean's working on this track pretty well too. And finally, we get some real nice vocal harmonies from Lean, which I know he breaks out live sometimes, but here it's just an octave difference, and it sounds amazing. It's a simple choice, but it's a really effective one, and I can totally respect it. And up next is the Young Lean classic song, Yoshi City, and you can tell from the title that it's already going to be a banger. And this is more synth-dominated, cloudy type stuff, and it's got these like spacey vibes, especially on the vocals. They're auto-tuned in this way that just sort of soars directly out in this pillar of light. And it's a really solid hook with a really engaging beat as well. And the verses aren't that engaging necessarily, but they've grown on me with time. So I can honestly say I do, in fact, enjoy them now, especially the hook about being a lonely clown. Like, I know clown, he's referring to clown as like the older type of clown that's like you're so people can laugh at, but like it's kind of weird to think of it in a modern context, how you call someone a clown as like an insult. Like I don't want to refer to Lean as that, but like it's kind of how he was treated. Next we have the song Ice Cold Smoke. So you got these drones and thick 808s that dominate the instrumental of this track. And it's more of an experiment in a punchy, shorter track length here. It doesn't feel that much as like a fully fledged song, but the emotions are really sinking in of this sort of like depressing, sad atmosphere, and it's working well. Up next, of course, you get the dog walk intermission, kind of like the Blowmore intro, if that's how you pronounce it, but it's kind of chiptune-y feeling as well, which I love the chiptune-y references in the songs here. Like they sound like a mix of like Mario 64, Donkey Kong Country, and like Game Boy Advanced or even Game Boy Color like level of like crushed little samples. And next we get the track Don't Go, and it's got the super long atmospheric intro before the beat kind of like raises a little bit and Lean starts rapping, and it feels like his voice is like almost embedded in the beat, which I've heard is a complaint for some, that you can't hear Lean that well, but it feels so much spacier and it's so effective, and it's almost like this impressionist way, and I love comparing music to impressionism. I think it makes me sound really, really smart, but it's this way of really conveying a lot of emotion with these abstract lyrics that you can't even hear that well. And it's so pervasive. The emotion's so pervasive. It's really melancholic. And there's also some bars about Princess Peach. Always a fun reference. Kind of still reminds you that Lean is like barely 18 here. And it's just that like he's about to get in this life that no one really deserves. And now we get the legendary Ghost Town featuring Travis Scott. Now, I know how everyone feels about Travis Scott right now, but like this is back when he mattered. He really mattered. Not that he doesn't matter now, but like back when his music and the man meant you were gonna buy it. So the beat on this track is unmistakably Lean, but what's kind of funny is that Lean clearly emulates Travis Scott here. It's so funny how they're on the other side of the planet from each other, but their sound is so similar on this track, and it's adjacent to Lean's regular sound too. Unfortunately, their voices differ enough from each other that really helps the track sort of swell and grow and keep a lot of momentum. And you'll see that on a lot of Drain Gang and Blade tracks, where Blade has all these different features, is that that's always what he tries to execute, is a sense of like movement, and it sort of has a lot of energy moving throughout the track. And here it has it too, especially with the super spacey sort of atmosphere that he's going for. And what's kind of funny is when you expect young Lean, if he was with a more conventional rapper, to be sort of like a Kid Cudi type that really gives it like this huge melodic twist, Travis Scott actually does that for Lean here. And I mean, of course, if you see Young Lean with Blade would do that for Young Lean, but Young Lean could do it for himself just fine typically. Up next, you get one of my favorite songs on the record, Monster. And it's for one bar in particular. The dark vibes pull through once again. They've been consistent on this side of the album. The 808s plus the synth yet again have become a real star player in Lean's production. The intro has sort of this like EDM type feel where the snare gets faster and faster and faster, which is a gripe on first listen, but you really get used to it. And this song is straight up depressing, borderline nihilistic. The bar, nothing matters anymore, it's just a matter of time, is some pretty solid of wordplay, especially because Lean's grasp on English in terms of a sense of understanding like metaphors and a very interesting wordplay is so interesting, because like his flows have not been this consistent, nor have his lyrics been this good up until this point. So yeah, Monster is a phenomenal track. And next is Volt. And this is another track that I don't have that much to say about, because it kind of continues the feeling from before. In terms of all these dark atmospheric tracks, it's probably the weakest, but it's still strong and it keeps the concept going. The thing that bothered me about this track was actually that like the drum sounds just sounded a bit off. I'm sure with future listening I'd get more used to it, but I think it does keep the feeling going enough into the track Lean World, which has these lullaby style chimes with this really thick 808, which I'm sure you guys can understand that the instrumental palette as well as the atmosphere of the album have been cemented long before this point. But it's so interesting because it's really diving down and exploring all these ideas. Young Good and Young Sherman really like did their work and had this whole board of little instrumental sounds. They're like, what can we do with this? And they explored every possible avenue that I think could work really well. And this track is a lot more loose. There's a lot more space for Lean to do his thing. And the lyrics have these grand sort of religious themes to them. And the themes of death are rather cathartic yet saddening at the same time. Then you get the track Sandman. And it's an attempt to give a sense of like blissful energy to roll out the album, sort of reach a point of catharsis and even joy potentially. But honestly, it's one of the weaker cuts on this album. I feel like it could have been cut, and I feel like the ideas here aren't done nearly as well as Lean was attempting. Not necessarily like a terrible song, but definitely one that could have been cut. And then you get the outro track, which I'm not going to try and pronounce because it doesn't really matter. It's another sort of noise chiptune collage track that of course shows Young Good and Sherman's just chops once again. It's an excellent little conclusion. So final thoughts on this. I think in terms of expanding upon Unknown Death, I think great attempt. I think the aesthetic is brought way into its own. The Sad Boys idea has been firmly established. It's a spotty track list for sure, but for a debut album, the potential is so visible still. And it's kind of interesting seeing Young Lean have like potential and then more potential and then more, like he has potential seen through Lavender. And then he goes into Unknown Death, and it's like a mild change in the sound a little bit, and you see a lot of potential, and then he changes again into Unknown Memory, which builds upon that sound. And it's probably not until maybe 2017 that you feel like the sound is like fully brought out. But yeah, the Doomer atmosphere is thoroughly engaging, and it really makes this feel like a singular record. Super interesting by that, and not enough records have a singular feeling rather than a boring and repetitive one. It's really an idea that is engaging enough to want to have the listener explore a lot more and explore the ideas of the lyrics and the themes and all the little lyrical motifs that Lean puts in. A super solid start, and it really sounds like he's getting a grasp on what to say here. But there are certainly a lot of strong tracks here that I mentioned. And then a couple years later, we are introduced to the Warlord LP. This is one of the fan favorite albums of Young Lean's, and I'm gonna say straight up, in terms of an album, it is a bit of a misstep in Young Lean's category. Not that I hate it, but it shows a flaw that's in every Young Lean record. It's that the best songs have a clear divide with the worst songs. Except here on Warlord, it's rather the worst songs feel low effort, uninteresting, just kind of repetitive of an idea that was probably perfected early on. Meanwhile, the other albums have really interesting aesthetics, maybe just a little bit overexplored at points, but on Warlord, it's probably the weakest middle section, and we're gonna get into that. But this is the last full-length LP of his that he really utilized features that much. On both Stranger and Stars, he has 0 features except for a children's choir at one point and a little bit of Ariel Pink of all people on Stars. But Warlord is really interesting because on one hand it shows that he's trying to stay sort of like his Unknown Death self and make these low-key cloud trap songs that don't have much to say, but every once in a while it's like he's responding to the criticism on his own album, and he just busts out into rage because for the context of the time, Lean was going through some serious drug issues as well. Around this time, I know his tour bus got shot up in the United States. I don't know the exact location, but and he also had a friend who died. I think his manager, who was, I believe, his best friend at the time. Which is heartbreaking to hear, but that's just some context before you get into the dark, depressing themes of this album, which it certainly contextualizes why half of this is low effort, and it certainly contextualizes the emotional crash of the other half. Anyways, Immortal is the first track of Warlord. It's this sort of dark trap track with this 808 bass growl for the whole track, and it's already showing issues where Lean's prominent charisma is just not showing up. His fun lyrical motifs are not really there as much. Not really a great intro, but the emotion is already established here, and it's not a track that necessarily like pisses me off or anything. which Lean never has a track that's so bad that I can't listen to it. And next we get Highway Patrol featuring Blade. And something kind of interesting on this album, every song with a feature he sounds better on, bar like 2 tracks that he's not on are the other best tracks. But it's so interesting seeing how like he still like is there to care when one of his friends or fellow, I guess, Drain Gang affiliates are involved in. And it continues the dark vibes from Immortal. And it's a rather chill track with a beautiful hook. And it's rather solid, but it's simple at the same time, which I think Lean hasn't really explored these simple structures that much. I know Blade does it a lot later. But Lean on Unknown Memory, rather, had these long intros before he gets into the song and the vibe is already complete as he starts sort of spitting over the top of it. But here the structures are a little more all over the place, and Blade doesn't add that much here as he kind of blends in with Lean's sound, but it's still totally fine, and I don't have an issue with it at all. I think it actually does make the track a little bit more appealing, if for anything than the novelty factor. Next we get the track Fantasy featuring Lil Flash. It's a very silly name, but he actually does bring a lot to this track. And it's got this really solid, like, reverb, swamped beat that is actually rather engaging. And it's one of the first tracks on this album that I feel really has a sense of momentum behind it. And Lil Flash's voice here is actually rather engaging, and it differs a lot from Lean, which is a nice change of pace. You got Lean's really, like, sleepy sort of style here, but Lil Flash really showed up to work. Not a criticism against Lean. On some tracks it works, on others it doesn't, but here it works. Next track is Afghanistan. This is the only popular Lean song that I don't really like. It's total meme material. I think none of the bars are like that good. The beat's decent, and it's enjoyable for like half novelty factor, but the hook is like, don't know why Kush is from Afghanistan. I know he talks about different marijuana strains in his albums, specifically the lemonade ones he was referencing, but I'm good without like the weed like botany project that he's going on. Besides, Lean's talked about far more interesting drugs than just weed. I mean, talk more about the Xanax, please. Anyways, we're on to one of Lean's best tracks here, Hoover, the leading single, and it's a banger. And I don't mean like a Lean banger, like kind of low key. When I'm Wario, when I'm in Mario Kart, I'm talking banger. His hardest beat to date by like a mile. It's not even like close. This is one you'd bring to a party, and it's finally acknowledging like the title of the album. This feels like a Warlord style beat. And it's very hooky too. The 808 is just growling away at the back as Lean's just punching you in the face with these super effective hooks. And his flow is absolutely 10 out of 10 here. No wonder this was the single, because it's utterly flooring. But next we get the track Fire. It is the cloudiest track on the album so far, and it's got some of his weakest bragging bars, honestly. Lean has some solid bragging bars that are rather interesting, referencing all these different brands, all these different weed strains and different drugs, all these different women addicted to various drugs that he was referring to before. But here it's rather lax and not that interesting, and I'm not really big on the hook either. One saving grace for the track is that the sort of production behind it is very hypnotic, but that's really it. Next we get the track Stay Down, and this is another really trippy beat, except now Lean came to rap. Got some pretty interesting lyrics here, and the hook is very solid here, one of the better hooks on the record. I mean, it's decent so far, and the production's fine, except the clap snare. I've complained about clap snares, but the snare here sounds like a clap, and it's obnoxious. I utterly hate it, and it really pulls you out of the immersion from a song that would have been fantastic even. I don't know why it's here. And the theme is great here, but all of the mid-level components and the sort of combination of the whole thing, a lot of the more like obvious, like literal elements of this track are weak, and they just don't complete it as a whole. Next we get Eye Contact, and Lean's just not here on this one. He throws in the towel, just doesn't show up. His bars aren't that good. His flow's not that good. His voice doesn't sound good either. Except for some reason, the track Grows on You, the second half of the track, I'm rather enjoying, but I'm not really sure why. I know there's some subtle changes here and there, but it's kind of bizarre. Now, I'm not the kind of person to enjoy music by like treating it as background music, but if you don't treat this as forefront music to engage, listen to, then you're not really making music that I want to listen to. It's just not fulfilling its artistic purpose here. But I mean, it's good background. Almost Muzak. I don't want to call it Muzak. Lean, don't make me do that. Next, we get the track More Stacks. It's really more the same without that much here to appreciate. And it's got the same themes. It's really just the same. And next, we get AF1s featuring Echo 2K. Of all the songs to have a feature, this is the weakest. And this one, I think, even had a music video of Echo throwing away his Air Forces and getting a new pair because they were dirty or something. And it's a shame because Echo, in my opinion, has brought it to almost every single track I've heard him featured on up until this point. He's also got his one LP that's solid, and he's got the one EP that's got some strengths to it too. But this song's very cloudy. It's reliant on a thick 808 and Lean using his lower timbre, but these aren't elements that really bring it to its maximum potential. The track itself, I guess, is fine, but the execution and its sound as a whole is really only demanded a few times on the album, but I feel like I've heard this for almost the whole album. I mean, Echo is like kind of engaging here because his voice is just so dynamic and so interesting. Stream Amygdala, by the way, the new him and Blade collab, but here it's just a weird midpoint for him. But next we get Hocus Pocus featuring Blade. Now, in terms of Blade's features, he doesn't do this that much, but he's using more of his higher tone without using his falsetto. He's just like belting and like screaming out almost, which I like. I think it's fun. And what I like about this track is that like the beat, the instrumental palette here is like Dungeon Synth instrumental palette. It's the exact same palette. It's just used differently. It's a different context. Like the lower bass growls sound like more ominous, like chiptune organs, and the higher synths sound like more mesmerizing Dungeon synths. It's so funny. It's hilarious to think about. The hook is hilarious too. Just where he says Hocus Pocus on every hook. It's meme stuff, but I'm glad he has some fuel left in the tank in his career at this point. Not to say he doesn't keep it going. We're like maybe halfway through his discography, and it gets better from here. But yeah, Hocus Pocus really brings the energy. It's a fun one. Next, we get Shoddy, You Know What It Do. Okay. It's a meme song. It's like Afghanistan, but it completes it. I think it's what Afghanistan was trying to do. It's weird to say I even like this song, but it kind of completes it. And I didn't even realize this until like recording this, but I feel like Warlord, its concept is to combine unknown death with unknown memory, sort of blend them both together with the humor on one end, with like the spacey production, and on the other end you get the more introspective lyrics, but it makes for a rather awkward execution. And I stick more with the emotional stuff. That's what really glues me to the record. Then we get the final track here, Miami Ultras. Here's the thing about Miami Ultras. This song is another banger, just like Hoover, except it's more emotional, I'd say. It's almost like blends what Hoover was trying to do with an Unknown Memory type song. It's got a really engaging beat, and the thing is, it starts so hype, and it's just punching the wall with like all this force, and it's kind of a longer lean track. I think it's around 4 minutes or so, and then it sort of like switches the vibe in the middle. It kind of dwindles down a little bit. It's in a weird way, it runs out of gas, but it makes you really think more about what you're listening to. It's less like this crazy thing going on, and then you're just realizing like what he's actually saying in the middle. Super interesting switch up there. I don't think I've ever heard that in any other track, where like in a way it runs out of gas, but then that's what reveals the true purpose of the track here. Not to say it's not engaging all the way through. I'm engaged the whole time, and sometimes I can listen to this track and just be shoving things over for all 4+ minutes, but there's nothing else here to complain about. This is one of the best tracks on the album, and one of the best in his discography so far. And it's almost like an acknowledgement of the self-destructive behaviors he's been engaging in this whole time, which I think is super interesting. Not that it isn't super sad. It's utterly heartbreaking. But it's like what X was trying to do with his more like hard-hitting, engaging songs, with what he was trying to do with his softer songs. It combines everything X wanted to be and what people thought of him at the time, and succeeds with it. Miami Ultras is a banger. Unfortunately, this album only gets a sneed from me. Haven't said that in forever. 4 out of 10. But I mean, lean just doesn't show up for half the track list. Every track with a feature is a little better, a little more dynamic, and a little more interesting. But other than the tracks that there aren't features, you got the last two, You Shot You Know What to Do, Miami Ultras, and Hoover. Other than that, not that much to dig through here, but it's still kind of an essential lean project. If I could recommend not listening to an album, I would say scoop out the good tracks here, but I feel like Miami Ultras hits harder after the whole record. Of course, this is some of Lean's weakest tracks so far. It's most of his weakest tracks so far, but it's probably got his most great tracks so far. Miami Ultras and Hoover are still brought out live, and Hocus Pocus is great too, and I think Fantasy works well too, and of course Afghanistan. Jeez, this video's going on so many nights of recording, you probably think I'm Matt Pat, but Five Nights at Freddy jokes aside, now in Lean's discography we kind of reach an interesting point, because he has his one mixtape, Unknown Death, and he kind of flops on Warlord, in my opinion. I think he's got some strong singles, especially Hoover as a single. I don't think Miami Ultras is a single, but not a great album. So what does he turn to next? Well, he turns to his buddies. He released the Frost God mixtape. Now, from what I've heard, that this is sort of like a hybrid of like a compilation record and like a whole bunch of other stuff he was working on at the time. It's really interesting because half the songs here have a feature, and those are usually the stronger ones for Lean. He's normally pretty good with getting features, even though there are a lot of names you've probably never heard of and that have no credibility, and all their album covers are normally pretty bad. But the thing about this record, I think it's got a lot of charm. It's got kind of a special place in my heart, if not for anything then the half the tracks here. And it starts off with the track Back at It. Now, this track kind of deviates from cloud rap. It kind of just goes back to regular old trap. It kind of feels like a young Lean is really trying to find what to do next. It feels like he knows some of the tracks weren't that good, and he's trying to find a formula that he can rock with. And I respect it as a song. It's kind of an interesting little point in his career to see him do this song. Not saying it's great, but it's not bad either. And it's like half hook. It's obviously very trappy, but I think it's a method for him that works pretty well. And next is the track Hop Out featuring Luckaleen. I don't know this man, but Luckaleen, I guess. And this one sort of goes a little bit more back into the cloud rap aesthetic. The beat is certainly Lean feeling. It's like very much the Sad Boys and maybe even White Armor collabing here, sort of in terms of an idea and how it feels. I think it's excellent as always. And this one kind of feels like it's calling back to Lavender and Unknown Death, not in terms of tone, but it's got this really amateurish feel, and the return in the terms of the recording of like the vocals and even the delivery feels like very much like almost like a party scene would enjoy it. Feels very local sounding. It literally feels like the dude down the street is doing this, but he's got a lot of talent and a lot of potential. It's got a lot of charm, and I feel like it's the kind of track that would work really well as an opening track or a concluding track. Maybe shortened even, but I think as in terms of a song, it's pretty solid, and it's a good point in the record, and also in terms of his career. And that's why I like this mixtape so much, is that it really feels like he's reforming everything here, because I think this is his turning point, and I'll get into that. And next is one of his biggest hits, Hennessy and Sailor Moon featuring Blade. I think Blade does a little bit of a better job on this track, but the emotions sink in so well here. The idea of Hennessy and Sailor Moon as like a title is awesome. Like, I feel like that aesthetic has not been like commercialized yet. I feel like it's kind of a taboo idea, honestly, for like combining like trap aesthetic with like anime, even though it's like a thing. Like, I mean, people clown Lil Uzi, people clown like Cardi, even though he doesn't do that, but he's sort of different than that stuff. And I feel like Drain Gang and Young Lean, they push these ideas forward. Not that it's so introspective and groundbreaking or anything, but it's an idea, and it's not a bad one. It's a cool aesthetic, and half of this cloud rap thing is aesthetic and a general emotion behind it. It's kind of impressionist. There's that word again, where you don't know exactly what's going on by the specific wording, but it evokes a feeling behind it. I'm probably labeling impressionism a bit wrong here, but I got a lot of theories behind it. And this song feels more like a Blade track than a Young Lean track. Not that that's a complaint. I think Blade when he's distinguished in singles outside of his couple of his albums. I think he has a couple duds, but he has some singles that feel very much him, and they feel very consistent. I think Blade comes really to work on this track. And it sounds like it's got white armor with all these special little inflections here, and the way the beat is kind of dynamic as well. And Lean's bars are weak at a couple points, but you can kind of forgive him because I've never heard Lean be this sweet. Of course, people reference Hurt and how that's kind of a sweet idea of a song, but here it's like, it's pretty romantic, and it might be about his girlfriend at the time, if he had a girlfriend at the time. I know he had one that he references in Stars a little bit, but it feels very real. It's one of the most real songs Lean's made. And of course, like, you're here for Blade in terms of like why you listen to this track, but I think it's dope. They both have enough dichotomy with each other, and it sounds like they're having fun. Conceptually, it's a good song. In terms of a romantic song that isn't like so depressing, Blade does that all the time. Lean does that a bit too. It works so well, and it's a nice change of pace for both of them. Next we get Cashin featuring Adam Killa. Now this is a little light on the percussion, but it's got this really spacey Y2K, like perfection, like drainer, like glossy aesthetic to it, which is common for Lean, but here it's like epitomized. It's like to such a degree that it's unmistakable. Unfortunately, I think this is probably one of Lean's weakest tracks, honestly, even in his whole catalog. His voice just doesn't sound like it's working here. This sounds kind of like a throwaway from Warlord. Just his voice doesn't perform here, and the effect on his voice doesn't really match the production either. It's certainly not like Grey Goose, certainly not like Kyoto, just to name a couple tracks that it could have been more like, but it feels like it's kind of lost, which, I mean, I'm sure that's a common criticism of Frost God, is that it's lost, but I kind of can forgive it because it's just a mixtape. It's kind of compilation based. It's just a general kind of fun listening experience, and in a way to pivot his career, I think it's totally fine. Next we get to the song Crystal City featuring A$AP Ferg. This is one of the best songs on the record, and I can't wait to get into why, because one of the main things is that Lean and A$AP Ferg, they differ so harshly, because Lean has his voice, as you know, and A$AP Ferg's is totally different. It provides so much dynamism to the song, and it's the fact that like Ferg has like this more like growly sort of a lower tone that's got like almost like a Cuddy type feel to it, but he's also pretty lyrical. He's got some excellent vocal chops too. And the beat is kind of like Miami Ultras, but it's got this more daunting feel to it. It's not quite as much of a banger as Miami Ultras, but it's still introspective, it's still glossy, and it's interesting to hear A$AP Ferg behind it, because it sounds like something he's probably never done before. Not that I know much about A$AP Ferg, this is kind of one of my first introductions to the man. And both of them really come to work here. Their flows are both excellent, and they're kind of similar to each other, but there's really nothing wrong with that, because it's a trap song, it's kind of short, and it delivers entirely. It does exactly what it needs to do, and it's glossy, it's kind of beautiful, it's emotional, and it's fun, and it fits the sort of Frost God aesthetic too. Like, you look at this album cover and you're like, yep, it sounds like that. Which all this kind of makes me feel like this is like Lean's version of R.I.P. Blade, where it's taking a tried and true method and sort of switching it up, except R.I.P. Blade is based off of a completed, perfected method, and Frost God is based off of stuff that didn't work as well, and it's like trying to refine it and find a new sound, and it's sort of like a callback to like several different eras of Lean. Then you get the track Kirby, which has more phenomenal white armor type beats. It feels so Drainer that it's excellent, and as someone who's like a sucker for the Drainer aesthetic, when it's done well, I love this. And it's kind of weird thinking of Blade having like the main Drainer aesthetic behind him, when like these beats off of Frost God feel more Drainer than like anything he's done. Not in terms of like emotion, this probably sounds like so cringe, but like in terms of what you think of the aesthetic in the instrumental palette of Drain Gang with white armor, it's more on Frost God than any of Blade's projects that I'm aware of. And Lean's sort of like crooning vocal style here is completely submerged under the beat, but it sounds incredible. It's one of these best techniques that I've seen done. It's done on Grey Goose all the way back in the Lavender EP, and it's only been done maybe once or twice since then, and I don't get why, because Lean does it so well, and that's one of the few things that I want him to do more, except drop a new album. Let's go, Lean. Let's do it. And next is Head to Toe featuring Blade, and it's got Blade on it, so you know it's a banger. And the drop on the beat is hard as hell, which suits Lean. He's perfect with that type of stuff. And also the switch into Blade is incredible, and I think this is probably one of the strongest tracks that switches into Blade like ever. Of course, like the Drain Gang like proper tracks have a couple like that, but this is like one of the first instances where you're like, you hear it and you're like, whoa, because Blade has such a distinct voice here, especially, and it's buttery smooth. What Echo 2K does to most tracks, Blade does right here. And next is Get It Back, and of course this is similar to the title of the opening track on the album, because Lean is really talking a lot up here about being back from rehab, getting back into the game, sort of refitting his own sound and just being a different person, which obviously is going to have some drawbacks. It's like he's not fully ready for a full-length album yet, which it's a mixtape though, so I guess technically it doesn't cost any money, I guess, is like the idea behind mixtapes, but I've never really seen that as like a thing. It's like, how are you going to stream that kind of stuff? Maybe like YouTube? What? That's like poor audio quality. I'm digressing. But Get It Back is definitely Lean's first song made on this mixtape here, and it's about him being back in the game. And is it my favorite Lean song? I'd say no, but it's far from the worst. It's far from even a bad Lean song. But the themes make this Frost God feel very complete. This is probably his happiest release here, and Get It Back really helps with that. And this is some of Lean's cleanest singing, like least touched up. I can kind of tell that there's probably a little bit of pitch correction, because Lean's voice is a little bit pitchy, which half the time honestly works in his style, and we'll definitely see that on Stranger. I think as a track, it's not one I like would go out of my way to like re-listen to, but if someone played it, it's not like I'd complain, because it's a solid track. My final thoughts for this album, straight up, some songs are bad, some are really good. It's totally mixed here, but I have just such a connection with this mixtape. It's hard to really explain. I'm just gonna give it a Reddit for right now, because it's mixed. That's what it is. It's mixed. Not all good, not all bad. It certainly is almost split right down the middle. Like you got the 2 bad songs on the first half of the LP, and 2 good songs there, and then like another good song and like another okay song, and the rest of the album's just like fine. And I think this is a good point for Lean to pivot in his career, which is kind of insane, because Lean's next project is Stranger, his most different release so far, an outsider one aesthetically. People say it's got R&B influenced on it, and there's so much going on this LP. Fantano, I guess, infamously gave it a 6 as opposed to 5s and lower for the rest of his discography, which is total BS. I mean, I think his discography is worth a little more than that, which of course Fantano's got his opinion, but I hate how he discredits Lean. Like, all his reviews are based on a point of like medium stuff, and there is context behind everything. Like, that's one thing I do with my channel here, is I try to provide context and stuff so you can enjoy the stuff as much as possible. Like, if I can't get you into a mixtape, I'll say listen to this track. If I can't get you into an album, I'll say listen to this track. If I think an artist is garbage, I'll say here's a good way to listen to them. Of course, some artists are beyond that, like Black Eyed Peas with Monkey Business. Monkey Business, like, you can't even like ironically get down to. That's the funny thing. Except if my brothers are watching high, they somehow managed to get along with my humps unironically, which a little disappointed, but love you guys. But Stranger, 2017. This is probably Lean's cleanest sound on his whole discography. His voice is sung a lot of this. There's not that much rapping going on. It's more of like a singing style, which he does kind of in the rest of his career so far. But it starts off with Muddy Sea, which sounds a lot like a White Armor beat, but it's actually Young Sherman here. But it does sound excellent. And I like this track because it really shows what Warlord could have been. It's really got a nice themes of how fame is like corrupting and how it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's not that complex of a song, but I certainly like it. And the next track is Red Bottom Sky, one of the longest songs in his discography. So Red Bottom Sky has this string sample that sort of sets at the beat, which is rather strange for Lean, because you're going to notice on this album, plenty of the beats actually feel really organic. And I don't mean like MIDI keys or like someone like stitched things together or like did it like live. It really, you get a lot of like actual instrumental And I mean like non-electronic instrumental parts like stitched together, and especially you can see on Agony, which I'm going to talk about for like forever. But it's a very organic sounding album compared to Lean's other stuff, which I mean I love Lean's other stuff. I really enjoy all of that to a certain extent. But the organic feel is a change I can totally get down with, which is interesting because Frost God, it felt like a prototype or a demo for a really interesting direction that they weren't going for, and then Lean was like, psych, stranger. Anyways, this song has some really nice themes and some really excellent imagery. I mean, it's just really just a sunset, but it kind of compares it to like High Heels. It's a really chill track with a pretty mesmerizing hook. It's one that's totally enjoyable. I personally like my Lean songs a bit more thick, but it's a rather enjoyable song. So what if it's chill? It's an experiment that I'm more than willing to get down with, and I'm more than willing to re-listen to. And also the bridge here is phenomenal, very introspective, very emotional, and I'm glad it's really starting to show some hooks emotionally rather than just an abstract concept of a feeling. It's fully implementing. Which, I mean, of course, the abstract references to the feelings have been interesting so far, but like it's another welcome change of pace. I swear, I'm like not complaining about this album. I rather enjoy Stranger. Then you get the track Ski Mask, one of my favorites on the album. The beat is actually rather hyper pop-esque, which shows him a bit ahead of the curve here, but he really came to work here. His flow is about as tight as it's ever going to be, and it's tighter than it's ever been. And his drug references have gotten much cooler when, like, they've gotten so much more intricate now. Now he's talking about all these different stuff. And this is a dope track. Kind of like pretty much the only banger on this album. Then you get the track Silver Armors. Silver Armors is a lot like Red Bottom Sky, which is its biggest flaw, is that it's really just kind of doing that idea again. But it is a little bit different. I think it's a little bit more mesmerizing and a little bit more direct. I think it's a little bit more mesmerizing and a little less direct. The flow is really chill, but it's actually still pretty engaging, and the bars are just consistent throughout. Then you get the song Metallic Intuition, and it keeps up these rather skeletal beats from before, which is, again, it's a part of the idea behind the album, which is probably why, like, going into it after like one listen was a little bit disappointing, but it really shows that, like, past all the drugs in his life and past all the fame and the so-called glory, there's a life there. There's a human being in that tour bus. There's a human being behind on that stage. And with the song, I did enjoy the bars, but it does start to show a little bit of staleness to the album up to this point. It's felt a little bit repetitive and not really like it's engaging me further than what it has here. If this was an EP and it stopped right here, I'd be like, okay, probably could cut like 30 seconds off the last song, but it's solid. But then you get the track Push Lost Weekend, and this is a track with a lot more auto-tune and almost like a glitchy feel to the beat. It's a really interesting change of pace yet again, and I like that this is kind of like Frost God's concept of doing so many different things at once, but it's a bit more successful and a bit more conceptual. And finally on this album, we get a really pervasive sense of atmosphere. It's crystal clear here. It's a throwback to the Unknown Memory style of giving you these emotions, which I love how dynamic this album is. It's really impressive how Lean has all these different ideas. When you got stuff like Warlord that totally fails at doing that, it's nice to see that he can really hold up a whole album with all these different styles. And then you get the track Salute Pac-Man, and you get a similar approach to the last track, but it's a bit more melodic, at least in terms of the vocals, which is welcome with Lean, because I think his auto-tune croons are pretty effective. And I think what carries this most of all is actually Lean's flow. It's a very tight performance overall. His flow never falters. I think the wordplay is solid, and the references to Pac-Man are always welcome. I've never disliked a Nintendo or video game reference that Lean has had. I just wish Blade would reference like Devil May Cry or something. It feels like a very Blade game, Devil May Cry. But I know people reference like Kingdom Hearts and like Final Fantasy VII. The sword games, the Japanese sword games. Squaresoft, basically. Next you get the track Drop It Scooter. And here you get a really sparse but melodic chorus. That's probably the most distinguishing feature of the track. And this auto-tune style that he's been going for here, and it's been established a couple tracks ago, has kind of been confirmed as his most consistent style to date. It's the one with the most level of quality throughout every time he uses it. And this changes up again when we reach the next track, Hunting in My Own Skin, another one of the singles off this album. And you could tell it's a single because the beat is phenomenal and it already brings the emotion to the table before the lyrics even touch you. And the song is actually a lot tighter and bassier and a little cloudier than the title might lead you to believe. It's not really like a banger like you might be led to believe by the title, so don't be distraught or led astray by that. Instead, just enjoy it because it's one of the best tracks on the album. It's another chill track with a very solid delivery, and the chorus here is a very dynamic switch. It sounds just gorgeous. I think you guys are probably noticing that I'm sounding like a broken record here. A lot of these songs are very similar in their approach here, and it's probably the weakest part about the album is that each song has at least a few pervasive, effective yet repetitive features. Not that it's never ineffective, but I do think maybe a song could have been cut from this album. Next, you get the track Iceman, and this is one of the most lax tracks on the LP. It's really one that you'd sink into, but unfortunately, again, it is mostly of the same sort of instrumental aesthetic here. Not really a huge change of pace here, but it does slow it down. I think it is a track that does make the LP stronger. It's just I wish I could say elements about previous tracks on this track and sound fresh about it. Next, you get Snakeskin Bullets, and this is sort of an intermission track because it's less than 2 minutes long, and it really helps the flow of the album, and it takes the exact instrumental palette from before and slows it down. And I don't mean by a degree that like it's like, oh, okay, I guess it's a little slower. It is a distinguishing feature here that is glacially paced. It like a full second before each beat. And it's a very effective experiment here. And you got Lean's really emotional vocals here. And I think it's just solid. Next, we get the track Fallen Demon, which changes up the pace yet again. And this is probably when we reach the strongest leg of the album, the sort of ending bits. These next 3 tracks are all very emotional, and this first one starts off very cloudy. And this track is one of the most emotional and best tracks on the album. And it's really climactic feeling. And the second verse kind of just leaves him alone with his own vocals. It's very meditative, very introspective. You reach the climax, and now you're starting to reach the anagnoresis, the realization of the album, the acceptance of all its flaws. And I love the sort of backwards like concept of this album. Like you sort of start with the ending to reach like a full plot circle. Like you got all these tracks that are about like gaining confidence and stuff, and being more confident in your own skin and finding someone to appreciate again and appreciating your own life. And then it's got to reach an emotional peak, and it's sort of like he remembers it all in a way. It's super interesting. But we've reached it. Agony, one of Lean's most popular tracks, and I absolutely understand why. Ever since I've heard this track, I've probably heard it once or twice a day since. It's just a heartbreaking track. It's emotionally wrecking, and I love it so much. Its approach instrumentally is not that complex. It's basically got like a used piano in the background just chiming out some chords, with one synth line with these little embellishments, mainly to break up the verses. In terms of features on the album, you've probably noticed there's none. This is the only track with a feature, and it's a children's choir, and it's so beautiful because Lean has had a lot of themes of nostalgia, at least in terms of how the songs have felt rather than what they've said, and especially like with all the Nintendo references and stuff. And it's important to realize that like Lean really got into his career a bit early. He was not really an adult yet. He was making silly songs with Blade and the fellas, and he just got thrown in it too fast and way too hard. And the song's a real exception of like what's going on in his life, and it's really like one of his most important songs because not only is it so gorgeous, but like it's just important that it realizes all these things. And this song cements this album as his most personal release, and by a mile. The lyrics are so gorgeous, and they're just slightly abstract, like all this like Halloween references and stuff, and like how his furniture is floating. And gosh, the chorus, the lyrics are like isolation caves in, I adore you, the sound of your skin, and it just repeats that. And like it's like it's God, I sorry, I'm not getting choked up thinking about this, but like it really strikes a lot of nerves. And it's just like being alone. Like it's something you need sometimes, but it can be torturous being alone out there, and that's what sucks, is like sometimes you need a quiet, and sometimes you just need to like enjoy the silence with someone else who might not even understand everything, but they're just willing to help. And it's not like a total like burner of a track where it just like shreds through everything with these insane like production things. It's actually rather mellow, but it's a song he breaks out live because it's so emotional, and it's heartbreaking. It really is. But gosh, I listen to it like every day now. And then you get the track Yellow Man, another one of the strongest songs on the album to close it all out. It's a more like energetic version of like Agony. It kind of treats things as like a more childlike view of like what once was. It's a very beautiful concept, and I'm sure you guys can tell like what songs I favored the most on this album. It's pretty much Agony and Yellow Man. It's spacey, and yet the production allows his vocals to reach their most blissful moments. And it feels like the only song where he practices like self-care in the themes here. Like there's so much suffering that inspires this, yet it feels like he's really trying his hardest. It hits wildly too. Like it hits like a truck. An excellent conclusion to an album that's okay, I'll say. A bit repetitive, honestly. But the idea behind this album, and it being Lean's album, it's nobody else's. No one else seems to even touch this thing. The production blends with him very well. And it's a bit rough around the edges, and I respect it a lot. It honestly makes it pretty enjoyable. Of course, you could just stick with like his singing ability in Agony and get the same idea across, but it's a very charming record. I mean, the standout tracks stand out a lot. Stranger is absolutely worth a listen all the way through. If you like more tracks on it, then go ahead and re-listen to it more than I currently have. I'll probably re-listen to it at some point. I do enjoy all of it, just gets a little bit repetitive. I'm feeling a Weezer on this one, and I'm just glad that after acknowledging all this stuff, you can really find the elements to appreciate, and you can kind of listen to those again and again and again, because Agony has the same effect on me. Yellow Man has the same effect on me. Hunting in My Own Skin is still a banger, so please enjoy Stranger. I know what you're probably thinking, that I haven't been on in like years. My hair is looking kind of shaggy, especially in the back, but I'm actually it's been one more day, so just gonna wrap this up. So after the pretty interesting LP that was Stranger, we transition into a little bit of a mid-period for Young Lean before we reach his pretty much essential magnum opus Stars with some EPs. You start off with the Crash Bandicoot EP, which has 2 tracks, and it's Crash Bandicoot and Ghostface / Shy Guy. And of course, it starts off with the track Crash Bandicoot, which isn't that crazy of a song. It's just a tight trap track with a couple flow changes, nothing too crazy going on. And then you get Ghostface / Shy Guy, which is like Crash Bandicoot just up to a whole other level. It's like, it goes super hard. The beat is a lot crazier, and it's just a tighter performance in general. So, I mean, of the two, I'd prefer this one, but I think it's a solid EP. I'm not going to give it a number. I'm just going to say it's great. It's honestly great. It's one of his better releases if you look at it in its like entire release catalog. I mean, it's no Lavender, where Lavender has some actual dynamics to it, but like for a 2-song, I guess I would call this a single release, honestly, I'd say it's pretty great. And then you have Total Eclipse, which is sort of like another 2-song single. You start off with the song 2 Cups. Now, Lean's delivery is kind of awkward, but once he actually gets into the proper verse, it comes across a lot better. But the beat is really nice. It's got this really low-key sounding drum loop that's actually rather appealing. I'd say the song is too soft, even for me, which is, I guess, unique for Lean. But, I mean, we had to reach this point that's at like some point. Like, it had to reach maximum softness where it starts to sort of deviate from quality. Fortunately, the next song is Smirnoff Ice. It's got a blasted out beat and distorted vocals, the whole shebang for Lean at his most hype. And it's got a really hazy feeling. It's fun and energetic, and it's kind of evokes feelings of like Kyoto or Ginseng Strip. It's a real callback single. So this EP is like fine. I'd say it's good. I mean, definitely listen to Smirnoff Ice. That one's a lot more of a, I guess, a classic in terms of Young Lean, but they're both fun. But in terms of Young Lean's catalogs, his singles have kind of always felt like experiments or sort of like little deviations from a style he's working on, which is weird because he always kind of, if they're to be expanded upon later, they never feel like successful experiments in the way that he seems disappointed with them, and then he changes into something else for the upcoming album. Those 2 single releases I've talked about were totally fine, but we just had Stranger. Stranger is clearly the biggest stylistic change for Lean. It's his most introspective record so far, and then we reach the mixtape Poison Ivy. It's his third and final mixtape so far, and what I like already is that it takes sort of how Frost God was like the mid-period of where he didn't quite know where to go, but he was back in the game and he was ready to make new music, and he just really wanted to get something out there, and it had a lot of passion behind it, but the execution was weak on a few tracks. Then of course Stranger. The thing is, on Poison Ivy we get a callback to what Unknown Memory was attempting with exactly it's almost like Young Lean watched my video, went back in time, and then made the changes, because Poison Ivy is super strong. Now, this mixtape is short. It's just 23 minutes long, kind of like Frost God, but that does not separate it from any of its quality. There are plenty of very, very amazing full-length releases out there at just like 23 minutes long. I mean, first one that comes to mind is Kids See Ghosts, but like I'm sure you can name plenty of others. Grindcore LPs are typically like 11 minutes long. But anyways, we start off with the single of the album and the first track, Happy Feet, and it's got a really nice cloudy atmosphere with a depressing beat. We're back on that Unknown Memory vibes with a much more matured flow and a much more matured voice from Lean. He's never brought down by anything. His confidence is through the roof here, and the message works perfectly. And unlike Unknown Memory, there's nothing that distracts from the theme and the atmosphere of the record here. It's just consistency. And he brings back a monotone tone with his voice, but he still has a tight flow. And it's genuinely engaging to me. Like, it's something that you really listen to, despite it being so atmospheric. And it thickens up halfway through, which shows a decent structure to the track and a sense of progression. It's a totally good opener. Next, we reach one of the more popular tracks off this release, Friday the 13th. And it's almost like a build upon Happy Feet. It's like a quicker and more percussive version of the previous beat. The switch into it is exceptional, and it shows just nice progression in the album as a whole, which Lean hasn't really shown progression in an album to be, I guess, that much of a concern. I mean, Stranger kind of had it, but like here now it's fully realized, and it's matched, especially with the quality. Like when I review an album and like I deviate between like a 9 and a 10, not that I've had a 10 on this channel yet that I've told you guys is a 10. There might have been a 10 or 2 on like a chart or something, but there's some of those distinctions, those important little distinctions are like where each song is in an album, whether or not it flows correctly. All that stuff is what really gets it through the finish line. And here Lean's really got that down pat. He's got a good progression through the album, which like for Lean at this point, he's not even like ready for that necessarily. No disrespect, but like having a release with just good songs from Lean is, well, it's impressive from anybody, but here it's also very impressive. And just 2 tracks in, we really have this dark atmosphere fully realized, and it's so shocking to me because normally it takes like twice as many tracks at least to realize this feeling, but here it's so pervasive. It knows how to spend its time efficiently here. It's 23 minutes, and in 3 minutes it's got the feeling. Next is French Hotel. Now, this is a track that kind of goes back to the Frost God type of production where it's got these bright synths that really stick out. Could also definitely reference sort of the Unknown Memory style production of the really spacey, like space travel almost type synths. Weird way to describe it, but it's just like that bright, like extended synth. Now, this track actually has a really hooky and tight nature to it, which Lean has, I almost want to say perfected up to this point, but the production is the swampiest it's been in at least a couple records here at this point. Like it's so just syrupy, and it sounds great. Really nice deviation here. It shows progression through the album. It shows some dynamics and a really nice experiment on the album. Next, we get Silicon Wings, and the song feels very Blade-like, not a complaint at all. It's also got some nice hooks behind it, and it's got enough personality on it where honestly it could have been a single. And we get sort of like an Unknown Death, like humor style reference here where he references red blood on my Timbs. Utterly hilarious. Like I heard that the first time, and I was just rolling around in my seat, and yeah, this is a great track. Next, we get Rope Man. This is a really engaging blend of crushed up synths and vocals sort of combined in this little maelstrom of sound. and it feels a bit SoundCloud style to me, but it hits a really nice emotional peak. It's one of Lean's better beats and one of the most successful on the album. The song Trashy is a more dense, sort of lax track with a pretty swampy beat. It's as dense as a brick, honestly. And this one, Lean kind of adds a little bit of dynamics with his rhyme schemes here. They're rather engaging beyond what he was already used to. Other than that, not that much to say about this track in particular, but I certainly enjoyed it, and it certainly benefits the album. Next, we reach the track Sauron, which, just looking at it from my perspective, if you guys know this, well, then you've probably watched any of my other videos, but I think I mentioned that I love Lord of the Rings, and like every few videos or so, it's just a fact. It's literally my favorite thing that has ever existed. So seeing Sauron referenced, I was honestly rolling around. And this track is hopeless sounding. It's one of the most depressing tracks Lean has had in a long time, minus Stranger. It's kind of the same sort of production ideas that the album's had before. It doesn't stray too far from this admittedly tried and true formula, but the real hit here is the fact that it cycles into the next track really well, and that track is Bender plus Girlfriend, or Bender plus Girlfriend, or I don't know what it's meant to sound like. Bender Girlfriend. You got some really dark vibes here in a tight flow. It mentions Freezing Moon by Mayhem, which is awesome. It's got a pretty nihilistic, actually emotional outlook here, which sort of closes the album off with a whole range of emotions covered. Also, there's a beat switch right in the middle that I'm pretty impressed with. It's probably one of Lean's most devastating end songs. A really solid cut here, a really solid end to this release, and you guys are probably gonna be surprised by this because I feel like this opinion is unique to me. But up until this point, Poison Ivy is Lean's strongest release. Yeah, like, I mean, I know Lavender I gave like a 7, and it's just too short. Like, it's more charming than it is quality. Like, I could listen to this at any point, but like I could like listening to Ginseng Strip when I'm having like a bad day. I mean, 50-50 chance I'm gonna hate it. But here you get a solid release here. Pretty consistent style, maybe that's one of the biggest flaws. It's so consistent in tone, and the themes are excellent. I can't help but like it, even if it is his most low-key release so far, with none of the tracks really feeling that much like a single or something that sticks out too much, which normally could be a huge flaw, but here it's singular. It's rather singular in its approach. It feels very consistent. So I'm feeling a Holy Roman Empire. Like, if I saw Lean live, he could put any of these songs in his set list, with a couple in particular that I'd really want. Next, we reach Young Lean's 2020 album, Stars. We finally reached the new decade. Now, this song was introduced to me with Acid at 7-Eleven, which infamously Fantano didn't like that song. He doesn't like the meditative and hypnotic nature of it. And if you don't like your songs being kind of hypnotic, if you don't like them being moody, just ignore this release here. But you have a very solid album here. This is one really to behold. I'd say you have some of Lean's best material here, and you're gonna know straight off that these beats are immensely impressive, and that's because White Armor, who's not a sad boy, he's actually a Drain Gang member, but he kills it on every beat I think I've ever heard done by him, and I'll get into that more when I talk about Blade a lot. Is that White Armor's beats have never failed. White Armor is just one of those producers with such a singular vision that even though it's grown a little bit, it shows such a level of consistency that it's honestly so impressive. And the beat here is rather interesting because when you think of like Blade, you think of like crystalline beats and these sharp, jagged, yet softened edges. The cloudiness is like a mist with all these like glassy tones all around. But Lean, you feel, is a little bit dirtier and a little bit more emotionally upfront, sometimes with like heavy haze through like thick Weedian smoke brought all the way from Jerusalem on these giant desert caravans with these alien camels. Maybe Young Lean would like Dope Smoker. That's what I'm wondering. But what I like are his bars here. They're hard. And probably in his whole discography, we've reached his most interesting flow on the first track of this new album. Then we reached the track Yayo. This is a lot hookier of a track. Some people might call it a little bit simple in terms of the hook, but it's a totally effective track overall. And it's some of his most melodic work yet. Some actual like note changes rather than like sort of like an extended like whole notes or like barred whole notes. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I did music theory, but his notes aren't as extended, and he's sort of like changing them up. The beat here has this supreme sense of whirling sort of like sounds behind it. It gives it a lot of chaos, and these bass hits are like really percussive, and they add a whole lot to the beat. But the next track is Boy Life in EU. Like, I hate to say it this early in the album. Boy Life in EU is the best track on the album, and it is one of the best tracks in Young Lean's discography. Top 2 easily, maybe number 1. And it's maybe one of the best cloud rap songs of all time. Its build is incredible. I could go all day on this, but let me just cover my notes. It's got these Game Boy crushed synths with this additional bit of reverb, which on top of the more ambient style synths underneath, builds just a fantastic soundscape. And it's like it's combining like the depressing angle of like his recent stuff with this sense of nostalgia. And you get this title here, Boy Life in EU, and it's like I mean, when you think of EU, you think of like depressing imagery. Like you could think of like UN stuff and like Eastern Europe's like many conflicts over the past like 100 years. You could think of like poverty and like inequality and stuff. And you think of like boy life, and like there's so many different things that could be included in that nature. And like because of Young Lean's sort of interesting upbringing in the world, by getting famous before he was an adult and just getting thrown into this life that honestly no one really needs to be in. Like you've had all these albums so far be like, I hate fame sucks, but here it really puts you in his shoes, and it's really like a lonely song, just awesome. And like his flow, it's not even like a rap flow. This song is more sung than it is his raps, kind of like Agony, which it feels a lot like Agony. And it's one of those songs that feels so desperate for love that it hurts so bad just to listen to sometimes. Like if you're having like a tough day, maybe you don't want to listen to this one. It's a very melodic flow with some somewhat introspective lyrics, not that like tight or anything, but it's more choppy and like just a few words, and it really has a lot of strength and simplicity. But you get this bridge, which I guess you could claim to be a flaw on the track, where he says he'll walk these streets till his feet bleed until it goes dark, and then you get the hook, the Boy Life in EU, which is just this emotional release. It's so gorgeous. And I don't recommend watching live versions of that because the crowd singing along, you can hear them sound so off pitch. It's quite terrible. Lean's version here has this huge swell of bass. It's and because I've listened to this song a lot recently, because I've been listening to this Death Consciousness CD I got for Christmas in my car, it's a bit like the Earth Mover drop, a bit different emotions entirely. I mean, both on the sad side, I guess, but both just this huge swelling hit. And the thing is, this Boy Life in EU hook happens a couple times, and it's just truly wonderful. The themes of relapse on this track are utterly heartbreaking, and it makes me really happy to know that we still have Lean with us. Next we get the track Violence, and where we get White Armor's sort of really interesting beat here that sounds simultaneously euphoric and destroyed. It's got this really drugged out feeling with a tight flow that actually sort of offsets it. And despite feeling so drugged out, it's actually got a lot of momentum. And this is one of those songs on this album that really asks about what matters in life. It's a really introspective track. Next we get the track Out of My Head. This is a lot more loose production, which gives a lot of space for the vocals to really pull through. And it's got these themes of self-destruction when you're in a relationship. And it's really starting to prove that there's a real concept to Stars here, that like even though the worst could be behind you, it's like it will follow you. Like nothing really goes away. The themes are devastating. Pretty relatable. Not that I've been through exactly what Lean's been through, but the emotions everyone's had. Then you get the track Dance in the Dark, and it's got these drony synths that kick the track off, and it's got this sort of like decimated vocal whispering style, which again, Lean's really adding all these different stuff to this album here, and it's really adding a lot. Now, this is the point in the album where I say the next bunch of tracks you really want to sit back and listen to. You don't need to be that engaged with them to enjoy them as much. If you want to claim that's a flaw of the album, that's your opinion, but I think it's a style that works pretty well for Lean. It has worked well for Lean, but here it's even perfected, potentially. Then we get one of my favorites, Acid at 7-Eleven, which sort of references a time where young Lean saw a guy get his head split open at a 7-Eleven when he was on acid, which for the feeling of the song, you'd be surprised that what its inspiration is, because it's not like a hard-hitting, like, trauma-built song, but it's more like a song where, like, you're at 7-Eleven and all the stuff releases there. And even though the mood is portrayed perfectly without the use of anything real, the line "I sold my soul when I was very young," even though it is a little awkwardly placed and might feel a little bit silly to most people, but it really confirms the theme here. It makes it feel like Lean does know what he's doing when he's constructing this song, and he's saying all these abstract vocals about these bizarre, lonely concepts like being on acid at a 7-Eleven, which he repeats many times on this track, the words "acid at 7-Eleven," for a very solid hook. In terms of a hook that's the same thing over and over and over again, doesn't get much better. Next, we get Stars featuring Ariel Pink. It's got this gorgeous, noisy, low-key intro. It's got this really drony approach, and the drugged out feeling is very prevalent once again. And the chorus lifts off almost like a Blade track might. At least Blade at this point in his career. And next is the track Hellraiser. And this is a similar beat approach, except Lean is a lot more upfront. He's got a lot tighter of a flow. It's another switch here. And it's almost like Lean has this dichotomy between these tracks, sort of like all over the album. It feels like he'll have a song and have the song almost again, but with an alternating flow and an alternating approach. This track has some fantastic bars, but also every little switch is buttery smooth. One of the best tracks on the album, just for the smoothness factor. Next is the track Butterfly Paralyzed. It's a very bassy track that moves it more forward than anything other than that on this track in particular. From the production side, it's a bit organic. Feels like it's swelling to form the beat. And there's a piano sample, which is always appreciated. I mean, the callbacks to Agony are gonna be brought up by someone who doesn't really comprehend what Lean's talking about, but it's got a very effective and hypnotic hook here. Then you get the track Dog Boy, which the words Dog Boy are mentioned a lot on the track, which some might maybe point out to feel cringy to them, but it's the fact that they're really introspective, and it depicts how he's feeling. Not that he feels like he should be a dog necessarily, but he feels like he's like treated like one. And he uses his falsetto here with this really tight, hooky flow, which I don't think he's done before. I think his falsetto's maybe been used on like one other track in his discography, and it might be the most hypnotic track here. It's a very effective approach. Next is the track Iceheart. And this song differs entirely because it has a much more hard and punchy momentum to it. Of course, it still feels cloudy, but in comparison to Dog Boy, it's really punching you in the face here. And the themes are a little bit generic here, particularly for Lean, but it is still a pretty solid track. Next, we get the single Pikachu. This track has a heavenly beat, and it flows amazingly, especially when Lean goes on top of it. It's also very bassy, which I can see why it's the single. It makes sense. And even though the themes are a little bit generic for Lean here, the lyricism kind of brings it to a different level. Then we get the track Low, which has an excellent build from the production. And then the chorus provides a pretty massive release. Rather than the explicit narrative of the track, sort of depicting the feelings you're supposed to be feeling here, what you get instead is a really depressing angle from the drug references and the family references. It feels like Lean missed out on what was so important in life in some critical years of his growth. Just heartbreaking themes all over this album. Like, it's so effective at doing this. Then you get the track Sunset Sunrise. It's not the first time he's mentioned the sun on an album. He mentioned it plenty of times, all the way back to, I want to say, Unknown Death. This is his most doomer track on the album. The lyrics referencing death and the Bible are just insane. And as the track begins to end, the bass sort of thickens up and drones out to kind of just leave you on this little introspective note, which it's just a really sad way to go. Next, you get the track Put Me in a Spell to end it off. It has the same piano feel of like Agony, but it's a lot more washed out. Now, White Armor's Ascension-like synths are the crux of this track, as Lean has these bars that are depicting ideas of being high, not because you necessarily enjoy it, but just to block everything out because it's just too much. If you couldn't pick up the idea, this is Lean's best project so far. I don't think it's bulletproof. Some of the beats get a little samey. It's not the most ironclad record so far, but there's certainly some of his best tracks on here. Boy Life in EU is fantastic. Pikachu is great. Acid at 7-Eleven is awesome. The closing track is awesome too. It's just a bit of lag in the middle that I kind of wish was compressed a little bit. Like there's a way you could have cut maybe a track or two from this album and had the same effectiveness, if not even more effectiveness. But love this album, and I'm going to talk about some of his singles before I give a general idea about his discography so far, because Lean's career is far from over, which is the best thing about it, is that we get more and more from him. So in terms of his non-album singles, we get Marble Phone featuring Krayshawn. I might have mentioned earlier that some tracks with Lean feel dated. This is his most dated track. And it's what's weird is like Young Lean doesn't ever feel dated himself. Krayshawn feels dated. She's still in that sort of like crunk, sort of like LMFAO type vibe back then. It's super weird to talk about. This song's certainly a skip, and it's mostly her fault, to be honest. I don't think she's that good. But Lean's part is fine. If you need more Young Lean, listen to Marble Phone. I don't recommend it. I think it's a skip. His next single is Kyoto. Not on Lavender, but it should be. Kyoto is an amazing song. You get these really spacey sort of like beats. His voice has this auto tune that works so well. It gives him like this monotone thing that's like just this like synth that keeps pressing out. The bar, Warhol, I'm Wario when I'm in Mario Kart. Come on, that's fire. Might be his best bar ever. I don't know. But Kyoto is an essential Lean track. If you listen to any of his singles, listen to Kyoto. Next is Crystal Clear Ice. It's only on SoundCloud, but I think it's a great song to listen to. King Cobra featuring Tyboy Digital. I don't think Tyboy's on any other Young Lean track, but it's totally worth a listen. It's pretty solid. Like Me featuring Lil Dude it's a solid song. I would listen to it again. First Class featuring Tyboy Digital is the other Tyboy feature in his discography. That's another solid one. The song Blue Plastic is one of his last singles. It's one that is rather remarkable in its tone being rather depressing, its cloudy atmosphere being rather effective, and its place being in 2019, kind of a weird year because not a lot else that year was going on. Except, of course, Echo 2K's E, and a lot of things outside of cloud rap, but Blade was almost silent that year. The drums are super loud here, which gives it just this thunderous approach that Lean has never had before. And the synths in the middle of the track sound simultaneously ugly and amazing. It's really hard to explain. This is another great single from him. I've mentioned a few great singles, a few other singles that you should listen to from his discography, and Marble Phone. I honestly have no clue where Lean will go from here, but I have no doubt in my mind that it'll be at least entertaining. It could be another mixtape. It could be another album. He's been on this sort of like depressing route for a couple albums now. He could do something a little bit more uplifting, sort of like an exiter for his career, except he doesn't need an exiter for his career. I'll get into that with Blade, but I think he's doing a great job. I'm so hyped to see whatever else he's got in store. One final recommendation before I go. He did have a concert that is entirely on YouTube. It was a live recording. It's Young Lean in the back of a truck. It's this hazy performance where it's just him in this truck with a microphone and there's like a couch. It's a really unique atmosphere. And it features songs of Young Lean's two other projects, which is Jonathan Lean Doer 96, I want to say, which is more of like an R&B sort of like poppy style that he goes for. I could be totally wrong. This was a guess. And you have his post-punk project Dodd Mark, which I think is entirely in Swedish, but I've heard it's really solid stuff, his other projects. But in this main performance here, you have both Boy Life in EU, Kyoto, Friday the 13th, and a few other iconic Young Lean songs, mostly his chill stuff and his really introspective and sad stuff, but it's a fantastic show. A lot of really amazing moments, and I totally recommend you guys to check that out if you want Young Lean beyond the albums I've recommended and the songs specifically that I've recommended. Check out that live performance if you especially want some amazing continuations of all this stuff. But that's all I really got to say about Young Lean so far. I'm just excited to see what he has next, and I hope he's doing well. Young Lean, if you watch this, he probably won't, but I hope you're having a good day. And I hope you guys are having a good day. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel. Maybe leave a like, leave a comment. Follow my Instagram, Twitter. My Discord page is in the description. It's popping off. Not really, but it's fun. But that's about it. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Have a good one. Bye.